The alarm didn't sound like it did in the monthly drills. It was shriller, angrier. Red strobes turned the polished tile of the Northgate Mall into a stuttering river of light as people ran in every direction, clutching shopping bags and children. Somewhere above the food court, metal groaned in a way that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Mark Delaney heard it before anyone else did. He stopped in mid-stride, one hand still cuffed in front of him, the other gripping the elbow of the officer who'd just marched him out of the security office. The cop was yelling something about "keep moving," but Mark wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on the ceiling above the carousel, the temporary Christmas attraction the mall manager had shoved into the atrium to boost revenue. Steel bolts, hairline cracks, too much load on a beam that was never designed for that much weight. It all came together in his mind in a single horrifying picture. "Get those kids off that ride," he shouted, voice ripping through the chaos. Nobody moved. Mothers froze. Teenagers stared at their dead phones. The mall manager turned furious that the part-time guard was still making noise, even as the cops tried to drag him out for tampering with mall equipment an hour earlier. Then, Mark saw him. A small boy in a red hoodie, stuck on a painted horse near the center of the carousel, looking right at his father with wide, terrified eyes. Dad Tyler's voice broke in the siren-slashed air. The beam above them groaned again, louder this time. A crack raced along the drywall like a lightning bolt. Mark yanked his arm hard enough to pull the officer off balance. If that ceiling went, it wasn't just going to be plaster coming down. It would be concrete. Steel. The whole midsection of the mall. And his 9-year-old son was directly underneath it. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. All right. Let me take you back to where this really started. Before the sirens. Before the broken ceiling. Before the handcuffs. Back when Mark Delaney was just the quiet night shift security guy everyone looked past, on their way to Bath and Body Works. Mark was 37, but the deep lines at the corners of his eyes made folks guess older. Every evening, just before sunset, his old Ford Ranger would roll into the far corner of the Northgate Mall parking lot in Columbus, Ohio. He'd sit there a minute, fingers drumming the steering wheel, watching the neon signs flicker on like someone had thrown a switch on a plastic sky. Inside that truck, the dashboard was stuffed with things that didn't match the uniform he wore. A dog-eared engineering textbook, a notebook filled with sketches of beams and load paths, printed emails from a state transportation department with his name on them back when he was Engineer Delaney, and not just Mark the security guy. Those days were gone. The consulting firm that used to put his bridge designs out all across the Midwest folded after one ugly lawsuit. The company survived by tossing a few mid-level engineers to the wolves. His name had been on that list. Same month his wife didn't come home from a late shift on an icy highway. Now he worked nights at a dying mall. Walk the halls, check the doors. Call 911 when the kids with fireworks got too creative. Make just enough to cover rent on a small 2-bedroom apartment and whatever was left over after Tyler's asthma meds. Tyler was 9. Skinny. Sharp. The kind of kid who taped his spelling tests to the fridge and asked questions about everything. He knew his dad used to build roads, and he still believed that was the coolest thing in the world. He also knew because kids always do that money was tight, and Mom wasn't coming back. Most nights when Mark couldn't afford a sitter, Tyler slept on a folding cot in the tiny security office headphones, wrapped in his Spider-Man blanket, while his dad walked the empty halls. Management didn't love it, but as long as nobody important saw, they looked the other way. That changed the day the new regional director arrived. Her name was Claire Hastings. Mid-30s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. She came in from corporate talking about efficiency measures and cost alignment in a mall that was already bleeding stores. She walked past Mark the first time like he was a piece of furniture. The second time, she gave him a tight, polite nod. The third time, she saw Tyler. He'd fallen asleep on the cot with the door cracked open, a comic book still open on his chest. Claire stopped, turned slowly. Her expression did something cold. "We're not running a daycare," she said later in the back office, her voice flat. "If he's here again, you're gone. We clear?" Mark swallowed whatever he wanted to say. He needed the job. Any job. He nodded, took the warning, and went back to walking the halls. A week later, during his rounds on the upper level, he noticed something he couldn't ignore, a hairline crack in the concrete near the atrium where the Christmas carnival tents were going up. Then another near a support column. The mall had added a temporary ice rink last year, then this year a full carousel. More weight, more vibration, old concrete. Mark knelt, ran his fingers along the crack, and felt his stomach drop. This building was telling him something. And when he brought it to management, when he tried to warn them, that's when the real trouble started. Mark didn't sleep that night. Not after the cracks. Not after Hastings brushed him off with that tight-lipped smile that said she'd already decided who he was before he opened his mouth. He sat in his quiet apartment after Tyler went to bed, a stack of engineering textbooks on the coffee table he couldn't bring himself to open. His tools were still lined up in the old canvas bag he'd carried through construction sites back when he wore a hard hat instead of a mall badge. His life used to make sense. Numbers, loads, angles. Everything had rules. Now the only rule was that nobody wanted to hear the warning if it came from someone in a cheap polyester uniform. The next morning he filed an incident report anyway. He stayed late after his shift, typed it into the computer nobody used, except to log lost and found items, and sent it to maintenance operations and corporate. By noon, he was called into the security office. Claire Hastings stood with the mall manager, a round man named Keith, who had perfected the smile of someone who apologized while blaming everybody else. On the desk was a printed copy of Mark's report. Tampering with structural assessments. Keith began as if reading from a script. "Not within your job description. I didn't tamper with anything." Mark kept his voice steady. "I reported visible cracking in the atrium supports. Someone needs to take a look before..." "Before what?" Claire cut in. "Before you cause another panic. You detained 2 teenagers last week for climbing on a railing. You cost us foot traffic with that stunt. Now you're diagnosing the building." Mark didn't answer. He just breathed. Deep, quiet. The kind of breath you take before saying something you'll regret. Claire slid the report aside with 2 fingers. "One more overstep, and we'll need to reevaluate your employment." He wanted to say the words sitting on his tongue, "I used to design buildings." He didn't. People like Claire hated being corrected, especially by someone they considered beneath the bottom rung. He walked out with his hands in his pockets, jaw tight. The kind of tight that only loosens when you're finally alone. But the world didn't give him that luxury. That evening, he picked up Tyler from school. The boy ran out with his backpack bouncing and a drawing in his hand, a sketch of a bridge with soldiers marching across it. "Mrs. Latham said we had to draw a strong bridge," Tyler said proudly. "I told her my dad used to make real ones." Mark smiled, even though it hurt. "You did, huh?" "Yeah," Tyler said, lowering his voice. "She asked why you're a guard now." He didn't answer at first. Kids notice the pauses. Tyler looked down at his sneakers. "You're still smart, right?" the boy whispered. "Even if they don't listen." Something old and bruised pressed against Mark's chest. "Yeah, bud," he said. "Still smart." They drove into the mall parking lot just as the afternoon rush was thinning. Mark clocked in, and Tyler settled into his usual spot in the back office with his comic book and headphones. But the tension followed Mark like a shadow. It started with the maintenance guys. They were usually friendly, but now they watched him like he was trouble-circling problems that weren't theirs to fix. Someone had told them he was overstepping. One guy muttered under his breath when Mark walked past something about fake experts sticking their nose in real work. Then came the store owners. Word traveled faster than truth in a dying mall. A few whispered that he was stirring up drama to get attention. A kiosk owner joked loud enough for the food court to hear, "Hey, Mark, anything else about to collapse today? Or are we safe to sell pretzels?" Some laughed. Others winced. Mark kept walking. He'd learned the trick, don't react. Let it burn a hole in you where no one can see. The only person who didn't treat him differently was Lila, the middle-aged custodian who cleaned the restrooms. She had 3 grown kids and a way of cutting through nonsense with the sharpness of someone who never had the time for it. "You look like you're carrying a boulder," she said that night, emptying the trash near him. "Just tired," Mark said. She studied him for a long moment. The kind of tired that started years before today. He almost smiled. Almost. But she left him with one warning: corporate doesn't like being told they missed something. Be careful. He was trying. He truly was. But the cracks didn't go away. They grew. 2 nights later, while patrolling the upper level, he saw the carousel staff assembling the metal gate around the ride. The lights flickered. The platform vibrated harder than it should have under that many kids climbing aboard. And the crack he had traced with his finger was now 2 inches longer. He pulled out his phone and zoomed in. He wasn't imagining it. The beam was failing. Not tomorrow. Not next month. Soon. He filed another detailed report. Measurements, location, vibration readings he took using an app he knew wasn't perfect, but was better than nothing. He sent it to corporate, to maintenance, and directly to the mall manager. The reply came 20 minutes later. From Claire. "Cease immediately. You are not authorized to inspect structural elements. You are not licensed to evaluate concrete behavior. Any further unauthorized activity will result in termination." He stared at the screen for a long time, thumb hovering over the reply button. He knew the rules. He also knew buildings didn't care about rules. They cracked when they cracked. At 10 p.m., he checked the back office. Tyler was curled up on the cot, drawing pictures in his notebook. The boy looked up when Mark stepped inside. "Dad," he asked, "why do people look at you weird now?" Mark took off his cap and sat on the chair next to him. He didn't lie. "Some folks don't like it when someone lower on the totem pole says something might be wrong. But what if it is wrong? That's what they don't want to hear." "Why?" Mark sighed softly. "Because then they have to fix it. And fixing things costs money." Tyler thought about that. His small brow furrowed. "But you fix stuff too." "Different kind of fixing," Mark said. "But you're still right." Mark swallowed. "I hope so." The intercom above them buzzed to life. "Security to the atrium," Keith's voice said. "Now." Mark clipped his radio to his belt and told Tyler to stay put. But Tyler followed behind him anyway, keeping just far enough back that his dad might not notice right away. When Mark arrived, he found Claire waiting with folded arms and a clipboard. The carousel manager stood beside her, red-faced. "We got another complaint. You were inspecting the foundation," Claire said. "He says you were kneeling by the ride with your phone." "I was taking a picture," Mark said calmly. "The crack has grown." "You are not an engineer." Claire's voice carried across the emptying mall. It hit harder than she knew. Mark didn't flinch. "Ma'am, that beam is supporting several tons more than it was designed for. The holiday rides add revenue," the carousel manager snapped. "You want to kill Christmas for this mall too?" Someone behind them laughed. Mark felt every eye on him. The uniform suddenly felt smaller than his skin, like it didn't belong to him, like none of this did. And then he saw movement. Tyler standing at the corner of the corridor, looking small under the fluorescent lights, hearing every word. Mark's heart dropped. He tried to redirect the conversation, lower his voice, anything to ease the growing humiliation. But Claire was already calling over maintenance. Show him the boundary of his job. A supervisor pulled out a laminated chart showing the responsibilities of security officers. He jabbed a finger at the section marked "Observe and Report." "No touching equipment," he said. "No interfering with operations. No giving technical direction. No, I know what it says," Mark interrupted quietly. "Then follow it." Mark didn't respond. He couldn't, not without breaking something inside himself. Behind him, Tyler's eyes were filled with something worse than fear. Shame. Shame for his father. Shame because he didn't know who was right. Shame because kids absorb things adults don't mean to spill. Mark turned around just long enough to say, "Back to the office, Tyler." The boy didn't move. The moment stretched thin. Then Claire said something Mark would remember for a long time. "Maybe you'd be happier somewhere else." The air in his lungs turned to concrete. He wanted to shout. He wanted to fight. He wanted to tell her that he used to be the guy whose signature lived on the blueprints of half the overpasses in this county. He didn't. He nodded once, the smallest motion he could make without falling apart. Then he walked away. But that humiliation was only fuel for what came next. Because 3 days later on a Saturday, crowded with holiday shoppers, the worst possible thing happened. A sound rolled through the atrium, deep, low, unmistakable. The sound of something giving way. Mark heard it from the far end of the mall. And every instinct he had, every part of the man he used to be, every piece of training he thought he'd left behind, erupted inside him like a warning siren. He started running. The sound wasn't loud at first. It was a deep rolling groan from somewhere high above the atrium, the same kind of sound Mark had heard years ago when a contractor overloaded a temporary platform during a bridge retrofit. A sound you didn't forget if you were the one who had to calculate the load limits. He froze mid-stride. Shoppers didn't even notice it, their arms full of holiday bags and cinnamon rolls. Kids kept laughing on the carousel music tinkling through cheap speakers. But Mark heard it again. A second metallic shudder. Sharp. Unmistakable. The kind of warning only a structurally trained mind recognizes moments before failure. His blood turned cold. He broke into a full sprint radio, bouncing at his hip boots, slamming the tile. People turned. Some backed out of his way. His breath cut in short bursts as he rounded the corner toward the atrium. Then he saw it. The crack, the one everyone told him didn't matter, had widened into a jagged black line that split the support beam like a lightning strike. Dust sifted down from the ceiling in a thin gray curtain. One of the steel plates meant to distribute weight was already bending, and below it, right below it, the carousel spun with a full load of children. Mark's heart slammed against his ribs. He scanned the crowd instinctively, searching for one face. There, near the back of the carousel, gripping the pole of a painted horse, eyes wide with excitement he didn't yet understand he should fear. Tyler. The world narrowed to a tunnel. A pressure wave of cold shot through Mark from the base of his spine to the top of his skull. Everything inside him, training instinct, grief, love, collided at once. He saw the image before it happened, the beam giving way, steel shearing the whole ceiling section, dropping through the carousel platform. Screams, dust, bodies, sirens, a scene he'd once been trained to prevent. This time there was no engineering crew, no project manager, no margin for error. It was him, alone. He tore through the crowd. Everybody off the ride, he shouted. Now move parents stared, caught between annoyance and confusion. A teenager laughed, thinking it was a joke. The carousel operator stepped out of the booth, irritated. "What are you yelling for? This thing is certified." Another long, violent crack echoed above them, a sound like concrete splitting open. Mark's voice dropped into a tone he hadn't used since designing emergency protocols a lifetime ago. "Shut it down." Maybe it was something in his eyes. Maybe it was the way the dust rained faster. But the operator fumbled for the panel and slammed the stop button. The music cut. The ride slowed. Not fast enough. Another groan. This one deeper. Painful. The beam sagged an inch. People finally started screaming. Parents surged forward to grab their kids. The carousel platform jerked as children pushed and shoved. Mark shoved his way through the panicked tangle of bodies, heading straight for the center, where Tyler was stuck behind two older boys, too scared to move. Dad Tyler cried. "I can't get out." Mark reached the gate, locked. The operator was trapped in a crush of frightened shoppers behind him. No time. He planted his foot against the latch and kicked until the metal snapped. The gate flew inward. He pushed through and leaped onto the platform, grabbing the pole next to Tyler and swinging himself up with a strength that came from fear, not muscle. "Come here," he said, voice rough. Tyler scrambled off the horse and into his arms. The beam made another sound, a sharp, metallic pop like a bone breaking. Mark didn't look up. He didn't have to. He already knew. He scooped Tyler under one arm and turned to the other children still struggling off their mounts. A girl, maybe 7, frozen in panic, clung to the neck of her painted reindeer. "Sweetheart," Mark said, stepping toward her, "I need you to reach for me." She shook her head violently, eyes huge. He knelt to her level, fighting the rising wave of dread pressing into his throat. "You're going to be okay," he said, steadying his voice. "I won't let anything happen to you, not today." A promise he didn't say lightly. Not after the night he'd buried Tyler's mother, swearing to protect their boy from every danger life could swing at him. He extended his hand. The girl reached. He pulled her into his free arm and turned toward the exit. "Move!" he shouted to the crowd. "Get away from this area!" The platform jolted violently. Something above them snapped. He didn't run. He charged, pushing through the carousel gate with both kids clutched tight. People parted, screaming, scattering. He made it 10 feet before the sound he dreaded most cracked through the air. A final sickening shear. Mark spun instinct, forcing him to shield the children with his own body. He braced himself for collapse. Instead, it was the first 2 support plates giving way. The ceiling sagged. A shower of plaster exploded downward, smashing onto the empty carousel platform they had just fled. People gasped. Someone cried. A woman covered her mouth in horror. Mark ran farther, lungs burning until they reached the far column of the atrium, where the marble flooring was thicker and reinforced. He set the little girl down gently. Tyler clung to his side, trembling. A piece of ceiling the size of a refrigerator crashed onto the carousel, shattering fiberglass horses and sending dust clouds rolling through the atrium like smoke. Screams echoed off the tile. Mark's eyes watered, but he wasn't sure if it was dust or fear or relief. He scanned the chaos. Everyone had cleared the immediate danger zone. No one was under the collapse. Not one child. He had done it. But the danger wasn't over. The crack in the main beam was still widening, splitting deeper into the ceiling. Each inch meant another chain reaction was possible secondary collapse, maybe structural ripple through the upper supports. He needed to stabilize it. He set Tyler behind the column with the little girl, and the first cluster of frightened families gathering around them. "Stay here," he told them. "Don't move. Stay behind the stone, it's solid." Tyler grabbed his sleeve. "Dad, don't go back." He looked into his son's eyes, saw the fear, saw the memories of every night the boy had slept in the security office while he walked the halls alone. "Buddy," he said softly, "I have to make sure it stops, or the whole thing could come down." Tyler's voice cracked. "But I'll be back. You hear me? I'll be right back." He squeezed his son's shoulder, then stood. The decision wasn't heroic. It wasn't brave. It was the only thing a father who'd buried one part of his family could do for the part he had left. Mark pushed past a crowd running in the opposite direction. A woman shouted for him not to go. Someone grabbed his arm, he yanked free. The closer he got to the center of the atrium, the heavier the air felt thick with dust and fear. The beam groaned again, dropping another inch. He scanned for anything he could use as temporary support. His eyes landed on the holiday display scaffolding stacked against a wall. Metal frames unused, strong enough to bear weight if anchored right. He sprinted for it. He tipped the stack over metal clattering, violently grabbed 2 long support bars, and dragged them back toward the carousel wreckage. His muscles screamed. Every inch of him shook. He felt 47, not 37. But sometimes the body listens to adrenaline more than age. He wedged the first bar under the sagging beam, driving the foot of it into a crack in the floor. He kicked it until it bit. The second bar went on the opposite side, forming a crude V-shape brace. It was ugly. Temporary. But it held. The beam's groaning eased, if only slightly. Behind him, someone shouted, "Oh my God, he's holding the ceiling up!" He wasn't, not literally. But the braces reduced the load, slowed the collapse, bought precious time. Mall management arrived late, pushing through the crowd. Claire Hastings pushed her way to the front, her face as white as the plaster dust. She stared at the ruined carousel, the shattered platform. The support beam split nearly in half. And then, slowly, she turned her gaze to Mark, sweat-drenched, dust-covered, standing among broken horses with makeshift braces planted like battle flags beside him. For the first time since she'd arrived at Northgate Mall, she looked shaken. "Mark," she breathed. "What? How did you know?" He didn't answer. He didn't have the breath for it, but Tyler did. The boy broke free from the column and ran straight to his father, latching onto him with terrified sobs. Mark held him close, cupping the back of his head, breathing him in, as if reassuring himself the child was real, safe, whole. Around them, the mall buzzed with a stunned silence. Parents clutched their children. The carousel staff stared. The store owners who mocked him now couldn't meet his eyes. Even the maintenance supervisor, the one who'd jabbed the laminated chart at him, approached the brace and ran his hand along it with disbelief. "You saved all of them," he murmured. Claire swallowed hard. The calculation in her eyes was gone. Something else had replaced it. Recognition. Humility. Maybe even shame. Mark didn't notice her. He didn't need praise, didn't want it. He only cared about the shaking boy in his arms and the fact that every child on that carousel was alive. But everyone else noticed him. They noticed the man they'd dismissed, ignored, minimized. The security guard who had warned them. The former engineer they never bothered to ask about. The father willing to run straight into a collapsing atrium for children who weren't even his. Northgate Mall would never look at Mark Delaney the same way again. And someone with power, had just witnessed something that was going to change everything in the hours to come. Dust still drifted through the atrium like slow snow catching the weak light of the half-functioning fixtures overhead. Emergency alarms had been silenced, leaving behind a ringing quiet, the kind of silence that comes after chaos, when everyone is still deciding whether they're safe or just lucky. Mark stood there, holding Tyler, breathing hard, sweat and plaster streaked along his arms. The makeshift braces creaked under the settling weight, but held. The carousel, once bright, loud, full of music, was crushed beneath debris like a broken toy. People edged closer. Not too close. Just enough to see him clearly. A mother with mascara running down her cheeks whispered, "That man?" He knew. He knew before anyone else. A store manager who'd rolled his eyes at Mark a week earlier removed his cap and held it over his chest. The older custodian, Lila, arrived late and stopped dead in her tracks, blinking fast. "Oh, Lord. Mark," she breathed. "You saved that whole ride." No one asked anything yet. No one dared interrupt the moment where a father held his boy, like the world had nearly stolen him. Tyler's hands were knotted in the front of Mark's shirt face, pressed against his shoulder, tears still hot. Claire Hastings, stiff and shaken, stepped closer. Dust had settled in her hair. Her clipboard was long gone. She opened her mouth, closed. It tried again. "Mark, what you just did." He looked past her, focusing instead on Tyler's trembling breath. Claire's words weren't the ones he cared about. Not yet. Not after coming inches away from losing the last person he had left in the world. Emergency crews began filing in. Firefighters scanned the braces with confusion. "Who did this one?" asked. "He did," someone replied, pointing toward Mark. A man in a hard hat walked over, crouched, inspected the supports, and let out a low whistle. "This brace placement is textbook. Actually better than textbook. Whoever rigged this bought us real time." Claire swallowed. She looked at Mark in a way she never had before, as if trying to fit a stranger into the shape of someone she thought she already understood. "Mark," she said again, softer this time. "Who taught you to do that?" His jaw tightened. He didn't answer. He didn't want this moment turned into a conversation about credentials or paperwork. Not when his son's heartbeat was still pounding against his own chest. But the question wasn't going away. Lila stepped forward, wiping her hands on her uniform pants. "Mark," she murmured. "Maybe this is a good moment to tell them." He looked at her, at Tyler, at the faces of 100 shaken shoppers, at the bent steel and cracked ceiling, at the braces standing like old soldiers. He took a long, grounding breath. "I wasn't always a security guard," he said quietly. People leaned in. "I used to be a structural engineer, mid-level. Worked on highway overpasses, shopping centers, storm retrofits. 10 years of it." A hush fell so deep the only sound was the settling groan of the damaged beam. Claire blinked. You were an engineer," Mark nodded once. "I designed load paths for buildings bigger than this mall, calculated shear dead load live load, inspected concrete that looked almost exactly like this." He gestured up toward the broken ceiling. "Which is why the crack didn't look small to me. It looked active." Keith, the mall manager, stepped forward, guilt already forming in the lines around his eyes. Why didn't you tell us this before? Why keep that quiet? Mark's expression didn't change. Because when I tried to warn you, the job I used to have didn't matter. The uniform I wear now did. Someone in the crowd murmured agreement. Another nodded. Claire looked genuinely thrown, not offended, not defensive, but stunned in a way she couldn't mask. Why did you leave the field? Mark exhaled slowly. I didn't leave. I was pushed out. The memory landed behind his eyes, meetings, accusations, the lawsuit, the day his name turned into a casualty of a company desperate to save itself. A firm I worked for lost a bridge contract after a contractor took shortcuts, he said. They needed someone to blame. My name was on a low-level review. They said it was poor oversight. It wasn't. But the story stuck. And when my wife died, he paused. Tyler squeezed him tighter. The medical bills hit hard. I needed steady work fast. This mall was hiring. The crowd absorbed the truth like a blow. Claire stepped closer, her face tight with something that looked a lot like remorse. We judged you based on the wrong things, she said quietly. You judged me based on the easiest thing, Mark corrected gently. Not angry, just honest. People do that. Behind Claire, the maintenance supervisor approached, hat in hand. The same man who'd lectured Mark on job boundaries days earlier. I'm sorry, the supervisor said, voice rough. I treated you like you were meddling. Should have listened. Mark nodded at him. It's all right. It's not, the man insisted. You saved all those kids. If you hadn't been here, don't finish that, Mark cut in. I don't want to think about what would have happened. A firefighter raised his voice from across the atrium. We need the building's original layout and structural plans. Who knows this foundation well enough to brief us? Every eye turned to Mark. Every single one. Claire followed those stairs, then faced him directly. Mark, could you help them? He set Tyler gently on his feet and crouched down. I'll be right over there, he told his son. With the fire crew. I'm not going far. Tyler sniffed and nodded, trying to be brave. I know, Dad. Mark stood and walked to the firefighters. His voice shifted steady, technical, anchored in a part of himself he hadn't used in years. He pointed out the weight-bearing lines, the stress points, the likely places for secondary cracking. The fire captain listened intently. When Mark finished, the captain let out a breath. You got training we can use, he said. Ever think about returning to engineering? Mark looked down at his hands, calloused from guard work, scarred from the past, trembling slightly from adrenaline. I think about it every day. They talked a few minutes more, then the captain left to brief his team. When Mark turned back, he found Claire waiting. Not with a clipboard, not with a lecture, not with corporate detachment, with something that looked like humility. I owe you an apology, she said. Not because it's the right thing for a manager to do, but because I was wrong. And being wrong almost cost lives. Mark didn't gloat. He didn't need to. He simply nodded. Thank you. She took a slow breath. Listen, I didn't know who you were. I didn't know what you knew, and I certainly didn't treat you as someone whose insight mattered, but I should have. That's on me. Mark studied her expression. Claire Hastings rarely let cracks show. Tonight she was full of them in the best possible way. I don't want to repeat mistakes, she said. And I'm not going to pretend I can fix everything tonight. But I want to ask you something. He waited. I'd like you to step into a temporary advisory position while we bring in structural experts, Claire said. Consulting, paid. Your expertise could guide this investigation and keep people safe. Mark blinked. You want me to advise? Yes, she said. I need someone who sees what others miss. Someone who doesn't look away when something is wrong. He thought of the crack, the ignored reports, the mocking, the fear in Tyler's eyes, the collapse narrowly avoided. He thought of how long he had gone unseen, not because he was hiding, but because nobody bothered to look. Then he looked at the braces he'd built, still holding. A crude, stubborn symbol of who he used to be, and who he could be again. What would the job entail, he asked. Risk assessment, structural oversight, working with our emergency response teams. And Claire hesitated. If things go well, I'd like to discuss a permanent position, something commensurate with your actual abilities. The words settled between them like dust, but not the choking kind, the settling kind, the kind that clears the air. People around the atrium weren't watching the braces anymore. They were watching him. Mark felt a shift, invisible, but undeniable. The kind of shift where a man stops being a silhouette in a uniform and becomes the center of a story no one realized he'd been carrying all along. He glanced toward Tyler, who was huddled under Lila's arm, cheeks streaked, but eyes shining with pride he couldn't hide. That look, that small, trembling smile, made the decision for him. "All right," Mark said at last. "I'll help." Claire nodded, relief washing over her features. "Good. We'll start tomorrow." But the night wasn't finished with him yet, because as he stepped away from her, another voice rose from the back of the crowd. "Wait," someone called. If he knew the structure was failing, why didn't we listen? The question rippled outward, growing heavier with every echo. Another voice joined it. "Didn't he file reports? A third, he warned you. All of you." Claire stiffened. Keith looked sick. Malstaff shifted with guilt. The power dynamic, the one built on titles and uniforms, on clipped orders and clipped wings, flipped so abruptly that even Mark felt the floor tilt with it. He raised a hand gently. "Let's not turn this into a battle tonight," he said. "People are scared. Scared people make mistakes. Let's focus on the fact that everyone made it out." It was generous. More generous than the mall deserved. But the crowd listened. Still, the shift lingered. Permanent. Unmistakable. Tonight, Mark Delaney wasn't the man in the cheap uniform anymore. He was the man who saved the atrium. The man who warned them. The man who knew what he was talking about. The man who stepped forward when everything fell apart. And before the mall emptied out, before the last family carried their shaken children to their cars, before the fire crews erected a perimeter and closed off the atrium for good, Claire approached him once more. "There's something else," she said quietly. "Tomorrow, after you brief the investigators, I want to sit down with you and talk about rebuilding this place the right way. Not just the concrete." Mark looked at her, surprised. "When something breaks," she said, glancing toward the collapsed carousel, "you don't patch over it. You don't pretend it never cracked. You start fresh. Stronger." She held out her hand. "Help me rebuild this right." The lights flickered overhead, but the braces held firm. And for the first time in years, Mark felt something he hadn't felt since he signed his last engineering project, Possibility. He took her hand. "Let's do it." In the hours after the atrium collapse, the mall slowly emptied out under the red and blue wash of emergency lights. Families whispered as they passed Mark, offering soft thank yous, or simple nods that held more weight than grand speeches ever could. A few store owners stopped him to apologize outright, stumbling through their words. Even Keith, usually slippery and vague, stood in front of him and admitted he'd been wrong to dismiss the warnings. Claire remained on site long after corporate told her to leave, working beside firefighters and engineers as they secured the area. Every time her eyes met Mark's, there was a quiet acknowledgement, not just of what he'd done, but of who he really was beneath the badge she'd judged him by. By midnight, the atrium was taped off. The braces had been stabilized by the crew, But the mall would remain closed. Mark and Tyler walked out together, the cold December air hitting their faces. Tyler's small hand gripped his father's tightly. "You scared me?" Tyler whispered. "I scared myself," Mark admitted, kneeling so they were eye to eye. "But I'd do it again if it meant getting you out of there." Tyler's shoulders softened. "I know." Behind them, Claire called out. She didn't look like the corporate executive anymore, just a person who'd had her world shaken. She held a business card in her hand. "This has my direct number," she said. "I want to meet Monday morning. The advisory work. It's just the start. But rest tonight. You've earned it." He took the card, slipped it in his coat, and walked his boy to the truck. For the first time in years, the future didn't feel like a door slamming shut. It felt like one easing open. 3 weeks later, Northgate Mall reopened its first section outside the atrium. Plaster was repaired, beams, reinforced safety systems, modernized. And right in the center of every planning meeting, with blueprints spread across folding tables, stood Mark Delaney. He didn't wear the security uniform anymore. He wore a hard hat, a consultant badge, and the quiet confidence of someone who finally had space to breathe again. His recommendations weren't just accepted, they were sought out. Engineers listened closely. The new construction firm requested his input on every load-bearing change. When the mall owner flew in from Chicago, he shook Mark's hand for a full 5 seconds and thanked him for saving the company from a tragedy that would have been unthinkable. Lila dropped by the meeting room one day with a thermos of coffee. "Look at you," she said proudly. "Back where you belong." Mark smiled. "Feels good." She nudged him lightly. "Feels right." And it did. More right than anything in years. Even Claire changed. Gone was the clipped, dismissive tone. She asked questions. She waited for the answers. She stopped hiding behind spreadsheets and started spending time on the floor talking to employees one by one. The shift didn't happen overnight, but it happened, and she made sure people knew why. "I got it wrong with Mark," she told the staff one morning. "I won't make that mistake again." People listened. Respect spread like light through dusty windows. By spring, the mall leadership made it official. Mark became Director of Structural Safety and Facility Engineering, a title he'd never dreamed he'd hear again, much less in a place where he once patrolled food court spills. The salary changed everything. Medical bills finally paid off, savings started to grow again. The apartment upgraded to a small townhome with a backyard where Tyler could run without hearing echoes off concrete. On his first day in the new role, Tyler came with him, proudly wearing a tiny hard hat Claire had ordered as a surprise. The staff applauded when they walked in, real applause, not polite or forced. Tyler tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad," he whispered, "they're clapping for you." Mark blinked. "Feels strange." "Feels cool," Tyler corrected, smiling up at him. The boy had stopped asking if people still looked at his dad funny. He didn't worry about the cot in the security office anymore. He had his own desk at home now, covered in drawings of bridges, foundations, and beams. When his teacher asked what his dad did for a living, he said, "He keeps buildings standing." And he wasn't wrong. On the 6-month anniversary of the collapse, the mall held a small gathering near the newly rebuilt atrium. Nothing fancy, just a podium, a few chairs, and a plaque mounted on the wall. This reconstruction, Claire said to the crowd, exists because someone refused to stay silent when he saw danger others ignored. We owe him more than we can ever express. She gestured toward the plaque. A simple engraving. No flourish, no spotlight. In honor of those who speak up even when they're not heard the first time. Mark stood beside her, humbled hands in his pockets. He didn't want his name on the plaque, he insisted on that. He said the message mattered more. People clapped anyway. And this time, he allowed himself to take it in. As the crowd dispersed, Tyler ran ahead, pointing at the steel beams overhead. Dad. You helped design those. Mark walked up beside him, hands resting on the rail. I helped, he said softly. A lot of people did. Takes a team to hold up something big. Tyler leaned against him. You held me up, the boy murmured. Mark swallowed the lump rising in his throat. Always will. They stood there for a long moment, looking up at a ceiling that wasn't perfect, but was sound. Safe. Built with intention and care the way Mark lived his life even when no one noticed. The atrium belonged to the public again. But the lesson belonged to everyone who'd been there that day. Sometimes the strongest people in a building aren't the ones on the top floor. They're the ones who stay when the cracks show, who see danger before others do, who run toward fear instead of away from it. And sometimes they're the ones in a uniform no one thinks twice about. Heroes don't always look like heroes, but when the ceiling comes down, you know them real fast.